the reviews were mixed. The theatre critics were for it. Here was something exciting and new, revolutionary even, and it was in their own backyard. It had been presented in a theatre. It was an opera for every man. It was a true folk opera for and of the people.
Just talking musicals with you.
Hello, my name is Lesley Knight, and welcome to part 4 of our look at George Gershwin's esteemed folk opera and musical, Porgy and Bess. In the last episode, we left the Porgy and Bess team after their 1935 opening night in New York amidst squabbling classical music and theatre critics, emotional standing ovations, and its Russian director Ruben Mamoulian declaring, "My God, you Americans are nuts! Why don't you stop fighting and just enjoy the masterpiece?" Meanwhile, George Gershwin's friend Kay Swift organised an opening night party with a guest list of more than 400 people, and she even talked famed publishing magnate Condé Nast into letting her use his Park Avenue apartment for the celebration. And it must have been huge, as it needed to accommodate not just all the guests, but the entire cast and 2 whole orchestras. The party was a dazzling success, and it was daylight before it ended. Although by then, the reviews were out, and it seemed they had begun to dampen the general air of celebration. "Gershwin does not even know what an opera is," intoned Virgil Thompson of Modern Music Journal. Although it seems he calmed down enough to finish his piece with, "And yet, Porgy and Bess is an opera, and it has power and it has vigour." Meanwhile, on the other side of the cultural fence, esteemed theatre critic Brooks Atkinson of the New York Times announced, "Let it be said at once that Mr. Gershwin has contributed something glorious to the spirit of the Haywoods community legend." But his colleague on the music desk, Olin Downs, reported, "George Gershwin, long conspicuous as an American composer with a true lyrical gift and with original and racy things to say, has turned with his score of Porgy and Bess to the more pretentious ways of the musical theatre." In short, the reviews were mixed. The theatre critics were for it. Here was something exciting and new, revolutionary even, and it was in their own backyard. It had been presented in a theatre. It was an opera for every man. It was a true folk opera for and of the people. But it appears their classically trained music colleagues weren't so open-minded. To them, Gershwin had tried to write a classical opera, and unfortunately he wasn't quite up to the challenge. He hadn't hit the mark. As we look back at it today with the advantage of nearly a century's worth of hindsight, could it possibly be that good old-fashioned classical music snobbery got ever so slightly in the way? Or was it so impossible for them to see that they'd just witnessed a work of pure genius? Porgy and Bess went on to run for a mere 124 performances at the Alvin Theatre, the brevity of its run due in part to the economic crisis still in full flow, but no doubt exacerbated by some of the biting reviews from the music establishment. Cutting their losses as best as they could, Porgy and Bess then swiftly headed off on a national tour around the country. On the 20th of October 1935, 10 days after Porgy and Bess had premiered at the Alvin Theatre, the New York Times published a riposte by George Gershwin which began, "Since the opening of Porgy and Bess, I have been asked frequently why it is called a folk opera. The reason I did not submit this work to the usual sponsors of opera in America was that I hoped to have developed something in American music that would appeal to the many rather than to the allured few. I chose the form I've used for Porgy and Bess because I believe that music only lives when it is in serious form. When I wrote the Rhapsody in Blue, I took blues and put them in a larger and more serious form. That was 12 years ago, and the Rhapsody in Blue is still very much alive. Whereas if I had taken the same themes and put them in songs, they would have been gone years ago. No story could have been more ideal for the serious form I needed than Porgy and Bess. First of all, it is American, and I believe that American music should be based on American material. I realised I was writing an opera for the theatre, and without songs it could be neither of the theatre nor entertaining." Porgy and Bess's journey for recognition has been a long one. Over the years since its first performances on Broadway, it's undergone many changes, not just on stage but in film too. It wasn't until October 1952, 17 years after its Broadway premiere, that the show opened in London's West End at the Stoll Theatre with William Warfield and Leontine Price in the title roles. It's been successfully presented as a musical several times and with evident success, particularly in 2011 with the Paulus Parks Murray production winning not just prestigious Tony Awards but also by setting the record straight and running for a total of 323 performances. But Porgy and Bess's finest moments must surely have been first in 1976 when the Houston Grand Opera produced a restored and complete original score, finally to be performed by an opera company over 40 years after it first appeared on Broadway. This time it was in an opera house, and it was an outright success. And then in 1986 in the UK, acclaimed director Trevor Nunn alongside conductor Simon Rattle brought the world an electrifying production performed in the leafy grounds of the Glyndebourne Festival Opera in Sussex, with Willard White as Porgy and Cynthia Hayman as his Bess. On a personal note, in 2013 I had the pleasure of interviewing the now Sir Willard White about what it was like to play Porgy in that Glyndebourne production. He told me that even in 1986 the cast as a whole were genuinely nervous about how they were going to be received at this venue in deepest Sussex in the English countryside. As the performance progressed, Willard told me he noticed gentlemen in the front rows of the audience were lightly dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs, and that at the end it felt like there was total silence. And then the place erupted. The audience literally screamed their approval, and Glyndebourne witnessed the longest standing ovation in its history. Crucially, both the Houston and Glyndebourne productions were based on the original score, performed as an opera by an opera company in an opera house, finally. A wonderful footnote to this is that in the 1986 Glyndebourne post-performance photos, you can see a rather familiar face standing amongst the cast in the onstage lineup. Anne Wiggins-Brown was there in person, 50 years after her own premiere at the Alpen. In September 2019, after successful runs at the English and Dutch National Operas and a 2019 Olivier Award, Porgy and Bess opened at the Metropolitan Opera House to glowing reviews, with Eric Owens and Angel Blue in the title roles. "If you're going to stage Gershwin's opera, this is how," raved The Guardian when the new production premiered in London in 2018, with Anthony Tomasini of the New York Times writing for the Met's first night, "Eric Owens and Angel Blue give the finest performances of their careers, and there is no more moving or consequential love duet in all of opera." And that's how it came across on Monday when the Metropolitan Opera opened its season with a splendid new production of Porgy and Bess. George Gershwin's life was tragically cut short following an operation for a suspected brain tumour after he slipped into a coma on Sunday the 11th of July 1937, just 2 months short of his 39th birthday. And yet he had managed to fill his relatively short life with an unprecedented level of success both at home and abroad, amassing not only great personal wealth but an international reputation as a celebrated performing artist, conductor and a composer of popular song, symphonic music and piano compositions, and a folk opera. When he died, the American novelist John O'Hara very fittingly wrote, "George Gershwin died on July the 11th, 1937, but I don't have to believe it if I don't want to." Although the recognition he so richly deserved for his folk opera wasn't to come in his lifetime, we can be fairly certain he knew he'd written something special. Porgy and Bess created far more than a stir and ruffled quite a few feathers in the musical establishment, and his insistence that he was writing a folk opera about the American people in a time when racial segregation and discrimination was still commonplace is more than noteworthy. In a note to DuBose Hayward written after his brother's death, Ira Gershwin touchingly wrote, "To the end of my days I shall never forget the exciting and thrilling period of Porgy and Bess. George had not only a great respect for you, but also a deep affection, and I assure you, though I believe you must have known, I felt the same way about you and considered it a great honour to be associated with you, however small my contribution." George Gershwin's loss was felt around the world. A talented man in his prime who lived his life to the full. with a catalogue of work that could fill most people's wish list of a life lived long, along with the undying respect of all who knew him, not least by his porgy, Todd Duncan. In a taped interview in 1990, Mr. Duncan summed up his feelings beautifully for the man he first met in 1935 with, "He was the type of musician that you loved to be with. He was a genius, that man was. A real genius." Coming up, we have a Just Talking Musical special interview for you with one of the most gifted band and orchestral players in the West End today, Miss Annette Brown. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lesley Knight. Behind the camera is the wonder that is this show's producer and director, Katie Ridout. You can find Just Talking Musicals on Facebook, on our website, justtalkingmusicals.com, and we're lurking on Twitter as well under the name of @NightandRidout. Oh yes, and as ever, we'd love it if you press subscribe and then you'll be the first to know when we post each new episode. See you here again very soon for another instalment of Just Talking Musicals.
Just talking musicals, musicals with you.
Hey, cool. I need a clapperboard. Cute. Hello, my name is Lesley Knight and welcome to part 4